Call the honourable member Russell Norman.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. Mr Speaker, we stand in the House today debating a bill that will require Fonterra to subsidise its foreign-owned competitors. I mean, that's the long and the short of it. That's what this bill does. Pretty much everyone's agreed that that's the effect of this bill. So the House is going to actually, in fact, it's worse than that. Because originally, when we set up the Dairy Industry Restructuring Act, we put a set of goalposts at which point the Fonterra wouldn't have to continue to subsidise its foreign-owned competitors or its competitors. And now we're moving the goalposts with this amendment bill so that actually Fonterra was about to reach the point where they didn't have to subsidise their competitors, and now the government said, oh, you're about to reach that point, now we're going to move the goalposts so that you're going to have to subsidise them for longer. So here we have, it's been very interesting to listen to national members, Mr Shane Ardern over there who talked about being a Fonterra shareholder, and we heard from Labor members over here about this is a terrible thing. But you know what they're going to do? They're going to vote for it. They are both, the National and Labor parties are going to vote for this bill which requires Fonterra to continue to subsidise its foreign-owned competitors in New Zealand. And not just that, they are moving the goalposts on Fonterra, so they're going to have to do it for longer than they would have otherwise. And National and Labor are standing up in this House with crocodile tears, oh, this is a terrible thing, oh, but we're going to vote for it. We're going to vote for this bill that requires our biggest company, a fantastically successful company with its problems, particularly about environmental issues, I give you that, but a fantastically successful company, one of the few companies from New Zealand that can stand on the world stage, we're going to require it to subsidise its foreign-owned competitors in New Zealand. We must be stupid. What other parliament in the world would vote for a piece of legislation that requires its biggest company to subsidise its competitors? If that wasn't ridiculous enough, let's step back for a moment. What we're looking at the moment is what's called the global land grab, and Mr Burns referred to this to some degree as well. There is understandably a great desire around the world for high-quality land with access to water to produce food, because in a world that's finite with growing population, the price of food can only go up, and access to food is becoming increasingly important. So right now, we have a whole bunch of foreign-owned companies that are coming in and buying up New Zealand land and agricultural companies. The competitors of Fonterra, like Open Country, Synlait, New Zealand Dairies, they are overseas owned. I mean, Synlait is the greatest one. It's owned by Bright Dairy, which is effectively owned by the Chinese Communist Party. And that's who we're going to have to subsidise with this particular bill. It's just ridiculous. Open Country, New Zealand Dairies. So Fonterra is having to compete with these companies because, of course, all around the world, foreign-owned companies are buying up land and agricultural companies. They're buying up access to those resources. We've seen it recently with Agria buying into PGG Wrightson, was one of the ones that happened just recently. And in New Zealand, we've seen a series of foreign takeovers of some of our primary producing sectors. We talked about the forestry sector, of course, which has come and had a foreign takeover of it and is now basically no longer a very high producer for New Zealand. The wine industry's got a similar problem. And so right now the dairy industry is the target of foreign companies. So wouldn't we be standing alongside Fonterra when it is currently the target of foreign attack and saying, actually, we're going to support you, Fonterra, because you are a really important company? Instead, the National and Labor parties are going to vote for a piece of legislation that requires Fonterra to subsidise its overseas-owned competitors. Now, these are not overseas-owned competitors that lack access to milk. They've got heaps of their own milk now. They have heaps of their own bulk milk supplies because they've been buying into to actually acquire their own bulk milk supplies. What these companies are doing with the milk they're getting from Fonterra now is they're using it in the shoulders of the season, which is when production falls off, because by using the milk from Fonterra during that period, they can maximise production in their processing facilities. So the foreign-owned competitors can maximise the production in their processing facilities and hence their efficiency by using Fonterra milk that has this Parliament, the people in this room are going to make Fonterra sell to their foreign-owned competitors so that their foreign-owned competitors can maximise the efficiency of their processing plants during the shoulders of the season. I mean, it is hard to imagine how the members of the two parties, thank goodness the Green Party's here, because otherwise this wouldn't even be said. It would just be suppressed and swept under the carpet because National and Labor, with their mad ideology about free trade and so forth. Otherwise, if the Green Party wasn't here to point out the fact that National and Labor are making Fonterra subsidise their foreign-owned competitors, it must be difficult for Mr Ardern to go to Fonterra shareholder meetings and they say, "What are you doing, Mr Ardern?" "Oh, I'm voting to make you subsidise your foreign-owned competitors when I'm in Parliament this week." That's what I'll be doing in this week. And so when we look at the submissions, which Mr Ardern talks about, we look at the submission from Westland. What does Westland say? Westland says, actually, it makes sense to have the dairy industry, the dearer milk, the bulk milk available for domestic producers, right? Which I agree. It does make sense to have that milk available in the domestic market because Fonterra obviously is such a big player. Though it doesn't totally dominate the domestic market as much as people think, but it is a huge player. And so it makes sense to have the dearer milk around the domestic market. However, how can it make sense to force Fonterra to sell it to the overseas competitors who are then competing with Fonterra in overseas markets using milk that Fonterra has been forced to sell to them? How can it make any sense that we force Fonterra to sell milk to the overseas-owned processors who then use that milk and process it to compete with Fonterra overseas? How does that make any sense for New Zealand? It does not make any sense for New Zealand. What we're seeing here today is a parliament, well, the National and Labor parties, let's face it, that have lost their mind. They are talking crocodile tears about how sad it all is, but they're going to go and vote for this ridiculous bill. The Green Party won't be voting for this bill. We think Fonterra's a really important player in the New Zealand market. It's one of our most important companies. We don't think we should force it to subsidise its foreign-owned competitors, hence facilitating the foreign ownership of the New Zealand dairy industry. The New Zealand dairy industry is facing an enormous challenge from overseas buyers who want to come in and buy it up, and fair enough. They want to make money out of it. It's access to food, it's access to land, with access to water. It's very, very valuable land. There is a big grab going on to access land that can produce food. And we are helping them because we are going to help them by forcing Fonterra to subsidise its overseas competitors in New Zealand. It is an absurd situation, and National and Labor should be ashamed of themselves for actually putting the Parliament in this situation. Mr Speaker, the Green Party will be voting against this ridiculous law.